You know, it seems with the current economic climate in the world, buying new video games really has become more of a risk to the consumer. And I say this because over the last few years, we've seen significant price hikes all over across the board when it comes to AAA games. And they've had games with bloated budgets and zero passion behind them. And unfortunately, they've flooded the game pool, making it genuinely hard to tell what's worth your $70 and what isn't. A topic worth its own video, undoubtedly. However, today I want to talk about the outlier to the observations that I previously mentioned. Today I want to talk about my time with Requiem. Is a little bit interesting, and it's a little bit of a rarity because I don't really buy games on launch, and this was one of the games that I decided to buy on launch. My experience before Requiem dropped was very limited, so much so that I hadn't even played a prior title myself. I basically had surface level knowledge of like who some of the characters were. I knew that Leon and Chris Redfield were pretty much a badass. Leon being my partial favorite because, I haven't completely dived into the rest of the series, so I don't know fully, Chris Redfield's story. But Leon, the entire time I played as him, has been just like peak gaming, dude. Peak badass. Once that first trailer dropped for Requiem, though, I knew it was time because we all saw that Leon was making his grand return. I knew it was time to dive in fully. But I couldn't just go and get Requiem on release and start playing it and act like I knew what was going on. Of course not. I didn't even know how the game was played. Like I just mentioned, I had no experience with Resident Evil before Requiem's drop, or at least its announcement. Once the trailer dropped for Requiem, I immediately went out and bought myself the RE4 remake. Thankfully, it was on a deal for $15, so pretty much a steal there. Basically, that was Leon's iconic game, so I wanted to dive into that game. I had a feeling that it was going to play a lot similar to Requiem in the Leon sections because, it's self-explanatory, right? He's making a return. These remakes have been the focal point in what Capcom has been focusing on and dropping when it comes to the Resident Evil series, so I figured that RE4 remake and Leon sections and Requiem, holy shit, would play very similarly. And playing that game pretty much took me all the way to Requiem's release. I played it earnestly. I basically sped through the story as much as possible and got the game down on a standard playthrough. And once once Requiem dropped, dude, once Requiem finally dropped, it was over. It took over completely. So much so that, a little bit of a fun fact here, Resident Evil Requiem is my second platinum game ever.
It's over.
Now, I know I'm kind of starting this series a little bit out of order, RE4 being my first Resident Evil game that I played. But with that being said, I am very happy that I started with the RE4 remake because Leon's gameplay is literally one-to-one with how it was made back then. So when it came to his sections in Requiem, it was a seamless transition. Leon's got that badass simulation gameplay, meaning he's got access to countless amounts of different guns and ammo, one being a straight-up hand cannon that, it's just satisfying to pull off in any circumstance that you find yourself in. He's got grenades, flashes, a freaking hatchet, and can pick up shit like a chainsaw. Leon throws projectiles to stun, kicks the heads off of zombies, and axes zombies to pieces. And by the way, bro can literally parry anything that is thrown at him. And if you can time it right, that is just another satisfying addition to this game. I don't say this lightly, but you feel like a beast in Leon's sections when it comes to Requiem. Arguably more so than the sections are pretty much the entirety of RE4. This Leon's a little bit different. He's been on the job a little bit longer. We're kind of dealing with old man Leon, right? But none of that aura, none of that badassness left the man in his old age. The dude is he's just the embodiment of what a badass is at this point. Now, it's not hard to tell that I genuinely think that Leon's sections are a lot of fun in this game. Now, I kind of think of it as a roller coaster, right? You're going up that first initial slope as Grace. You're playing the survival horror. You're in first person. You're checking your corners. You're freaking out about just about anything that could be around that corner to end your shit, right? And then you reach the top. You're switching over to Leon's gameplay. And then you just go down that slope. Full speed. It is a complete ride the entire time. Every time you're playing as Leon, there's always something cool going on. There's never really any downtime. You're always finding new pieces. You're always fighting zombies or tyrants or mini bosses. There's always something cool going on to keep you entertained. It makes you fiend for those Leon sections even more. But now we're going to talk about the side of Grace Ashcroft, who is arguably more of the main character in this game than even Leon was. But we had already talked about Leon extensively. I figured we'd cover him first. But the meat and potatoes of this game is definitely Grace Ashcroft's section, where it's an entirely different gaming experience altogether. Something a little bit more akin to Resident Evil 7 and Resident Evil 8. But first, who is Grace Ashcroft? Grace is the newest character that was introduced into Resident Evil Requiem. And she is the daughter of Alyssa Ashcroft, a past character that was introduced way back in Resident Evil Outbreak, I believe, on the PlayStation 2. And her voice actress, Angela Santalbano, this was her first gaming voice role that she had ever done. And she is by far the standout in this entire game. Like, completely earth-shattering performance coming out of her. It was entirely well done. Now, the sections in which you're playing as Grace, that's where the game slows down a bit. You know, this is what I said a little bit ago. It's a completely different approach to this game entirely. In Leon's sections, it's more, you know, action-based. In Grace's sections, you're definitely in that horror survival aspect of the game. You play with a higher amount of stealth because you are grossly unequipped for what you're supposed to get past. And I'm talking zombie butchers. I'm talking singing zombie girls with supersonic waves for voices, blisterhead zombies that have the aggression of a fucking pissed off chihuahua, and all the other zombie variations that you can think of. All of that, and you're given one Requiem bullet to fight against that in the beginning. Fucked. You're fucked. Anytime you're playing as Grace, you're the feeling you feel, fucked. You're fucked. However, I do want to say and stress and emphasize that you do end up finding other pistols throughout the care center and ammo to kind of equip yourself better. And once you end up finding the blood collector, you can craft more ammo, hemolytic injectors, crappy little makeshift knives, all of this to help you fight off the overwhelming opposition that's thrown at you in these Grace sections. So you got two different types of gameplay styles here. This was not, you know, anything that was a secret. Capcom really was upfront about this. You got the Leon sections that is focused on the gun-toting action, you know, survival horror, you know, aspect. A goat. You're just walking around as a fucking monster. And then the Grace sections are where you focus more on the atmospheric, chilling, scary vibes that Resident Evil is supposed to be portraying to you. And I think that is a good approach to have because I think it shakes up the game and it keeps it interesting. Because like I mentioned this to a couple of my friends, but you'll be playing X amount of hours as Grace, right? And you'll just start to get to that point where you're starting to feel like, man, I kind of need a shake up in the gameplay, you know? I've been playing Grace's survival horror sections. I've been creeping around these corners a little too long. I need something a little bit more fast-paced, and then boom, the game throws a quick Leon section at you. And it's kind of that give and take, you know? You'll be playing Leon sections for a while, and you'll start getting, you know, a little ran down on the fucking, you know, action horror, and then you'll want to go back to the survival, and then boom, you're thrown back into a Grace section. So it balances itself out pretty evenly, I'd say. There's never really been a moment in the playthroughs that I've played where I was starting to feel like one person's gameplay was starting to override or belittle the other person's gameplay. You're given basically a 50-50 amount of both, which I think is great. So I mentioned earlier that before Requiem dropped, I hadn't really experienced too much of the deeper lore in Resident Evil, so I'll keep this section pretty brief. However, I did take a few deep dives on YouTube while at work to help smart myself up to the deeper lore on what's going on. So to keep it brief, I thought that the story was pretty enjoyable and I thought that it was written pretty well. I did enjoy all the callbacks and all of them were basically hitting the way that they were supposed to, and that's because of that deeper lore. I'm so thankful I was able to do that. However, if a new player were to pick this game up, I'm pretty confident that that player would still be able to consume the narrative and competently piece together what's going on and how we've gotten to where we've gotten. Of course, just knowing the deeper lore by doing a deep dive and or have just playing the past games outright is much better in consuming this story. But I wouldn't assume that anyone that's buying this game would go into it completely blind without knowing at least a little bit of what Resident Evil is about. I feel like that person would be a little bit foolish to just completely blind. I'm confident that people that are buying this game know of what Resident Evil is and know what is going on in the narrative. But obviously knowing from start to finish, you know, all the events that have taken place just makes this story that much better. Resident Evil Requiem was a risk paid off in its entirety. You can see the passion with each sequence you play through. Every cutscene you watch and every voice performance taking place was done with such a passion you can't help but appreciating deeper with every playthrough. I could not recommend this title more to anyone that appreciates a fantastic, chilling gaming experience, and Capcom gave me more than just a great game to experience and get the platinum on. They gave me hope in an ever-declining AAA games industry, and for that, I am thankful. But with all that being said, that's where I'd like to conclude this video. Thank you guys so much for watching today's video. Leave a like if you enjoyed. Comment below what your guys' thoughts on Resident Evil Requiem was. Was I hitting the nail on the head, or was there some things that made you guys cringe? Is there something you guys could tell me? Let me know in the comments below. Subscribe if you want. It's free. And why not? I come out with videos every once in a while, so you might as well. Again, thank you guys so much for coming around. I'll see you guys in the next one. See ya.